Finland is mobilizing its army. This has ramification of what's going on in the entire theater near Russia and Ukraine. Lucas, let's have an update on what's going on here. You've been following this closely. What do we need to know about what's happening in Ukraine right now?
I think the most important thing that I've seen with regards to what's happening in Ukraine was the release of all the males in the country under the age of 22. The release for them to leave the country, and I think I saw reports something like 10,000 the day that they were allowed to leave the country. 10,000 males under the age of 22 fled to Poland that very same day.
What
So
does what does Poland think of that? I mean, are they happy to have all these able-bodied males flooding into their country?
I don't think so. I think Poland has. I would imagine that Poland has grown very weary of hosting refugees through the entirety of the Ukrainian conflict. So that has added to the pressure. There's an old saying that visitors, when family and friends visit your house, they start to stink like fish after 3 days. And it's been years that these refugees have been living in Poland. So stressing the normal lifestyle and livelihoods of the Polish people, and they're willing to they're willing to. I guess their sense of patriotism um, has given them patience, but I would imagine that one, they're tired of the refugees that are currently living in their countries. Secondly, um, for a large contingency of young men who have been living in a war situation, whose loyalties are questionable, I would see that as a great security risk. So I haven't heard anything explicitly from the Poles on that exodus, but you would have to imagine that the leadership in Poland is now looking for a solution to the Ukrainian-Russian war as quickly as possible.
And we have an announcement from President Trump that's happening. I suspect this has something to do with NATO. Is there anything else that might be on the docket that could rise to the level of needing to be announced from the Oval Office?
I mean, the first thing that came to my mind when I saw that Trump was making an announcement from the Oval Office was that um, that this could be some sort of announcement with regards to security risks that exist inside the United States. That the narrative of the violence and the immigration issues that exist in the country are have led to a level which requires him to bring troops here into the United States and establish some sort of military perimeter on our southern border. So, that is based merely on me having an expectation that Trump was going to make that claim and that policy move at some point, because we also have the now 7 ships that are heading down to Venezuela. The narrative coming from the administration that this is a policing action that's based on fears about criminal gangs and narcotics, drug running. But I don't think that the United States is actually going to engage in military action there because of the broad support that Venezuela has from its neighbors in South America, as well as countries like Russia and China in the broader world. So it could be that, but I think there's also an equal, if not more likely, chance that this is some sort of announcement that has to do with Ukraine. We also, Trump had the European leaders come to the Oval Office, or come to the White House after the Alaska summit with Putin, and he also had a meeting with Zelensky, and Zelensky seemed almost chipper in that interview. And given the larger understanding of what's going on in Ukraine, um, the the impending loss. Uh, I don't know how else to phrase it. The impending loss, the devastation, the 1,700,000 Ukrainian troops that have been killed over the last couple of years. For Zelensky to seem so so much more chipper than his last meeting with Trump in the Oval Office, in which he was very agitated and very aggressive. It seemed to me that there was some sort of deal that had been worked out, and that Zelensky was not going to be fed to the sharks, Russian or Ukrainian, after the loss. So that gave me also that also I feel like leads to a timing of there being some sort of announcement with regards to Ukraine and NATO.
Because the only thing else maybe that would rise to some sort of an announcement from the Oval Office would be something that's happening in the Middle East, but that seems, to me, that seems less likely.
I agree, because I don't know if there's any way to spin what's happening in the Middle East with good news. And here, Trump has long been very vocal about his that he does not view the United States involvement in NATO as beneficial for the United States. And he's done everything that he could in his first administration and now second administration to remove the United States from the NATO alliance. And as we see the European countries making more desperate moves to prolong a war with Russia, and to make themselves very vulnerable and to commit themselves in very dangerous ways, not just Finland, but I'm also thinking about Germany. And by the way, I don't know if you've caught the news going around about the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland, far-right party that is anti war with Russia, and is all about finding out who blew up the Nord Stream pipeline and fixing the Nord Stream pipeline and returning Germany to an industrial country that is basing its industry off cheap Russian gas. Six of the nominees or the candidates, the AfD candidates, have died in the last 2 weeks.
There is no way that is a coincidence. Somebody is cleaning house.
Unbelievable, but I totally agree with you. And then we've seen the French, taking out the opposition pro-Russian party of Marine Le Pen. We've seen what's occurred in Romania with taking out the pro-Russian candidate Georgescu there. Britain, Keir Starmer seems to have a government under fire. We're seeing thousands and thousands and thousands of English flags. I think that English flag is a act of rebellion, not only against the trotting on of the liberties of speech in that country, but also of the reasoning behind that being, marshaling the people against an imaginary foe in Russia. We also saw the bombing of the pipeline that feeds Hungary and Slovakia, and Viktor Orban with Hungary has been I wouldn't say pro-Putin, but has been questioning the resolve and the narrative that the European leaders have been putting forth with regards to why they need to go to war with Russia. And this pipeline that the Ukrainians bombed with the knowledge and the support of the European Union and NATO, I would say only has driven a deeper wedge in the NATO alliance. And we saw Slovakia's president have a meeting with Putin shortly after that bombing. So I think we're seeing a great I don't know, maybe the opening of a wave of revolutions like we saw in 2008 in North Africa and the Middle East occurring in Europe. Maybe that will be suppressed further. And
a turning of the tide of the sentiment towards Putin, it seems. I mean, country after country kind of lining up to normalize relations with Russia. I guess they really want that oil.
I want that oil, or also don't understand. Don't believe the narrative that Russia is coming to Europe to take all the land and to fight all the people. So going back to Trump's meeting this afternoon, I think that if Trump ever had a chance to leave NATO, or to get out before the United States is called on to supply more than weapons, or promises to deliver weapons to NATO, then the time would be now. And there is a prevailing narrative, at least on X. I looked at it this morning, and my top feed on the news side was that this announcement in the Oval Office had to do with Trump's health. I don't believe that for a minute. I think that it's going to be either with an announcement with regards to NATO, or possibly about the security of the United States. Of course, it could be both, because going back to the real reason I think Trump is raising a narrative about the security threats of drugs and immigrants, Chinese nationals, Chinese land ownership, et cetera, here in the United States, actually has to do with giving an alternative reason for being for the military that's stationed in the Middle East and in Europe. So if he's going to pull them back from NATO, pull them back from Iraq and Afghanistan, and Syria and Qatar, then he's got to give them a job to do. And if that job is to go stand on the southern border and to check everybody for drugs, so be it, I believe is Trump's understanding of the situation.
I mean, it's certainly not because we need military presence in the United States. This narrative that somehow there's a necessity to have military deployed within the United States, that seems completely disingenuous. So if there's an ulterior motive here where Trump needs this narrative to be able to bring some of the troops that are deployed internationally back home, well, maybe that's the case. But I having visited the places where Trump and the rest of the administration have said there is a substantial need, I think that's disingenuous. It's not the case. I've seen no evidence that the military needs to be deployed in Washington, D.C., LA, or any of the places that he's mentioned that urgently need our military presence.
I mean, I'm in 100% agreement, but I thought this writing was starting to be scrawled on the wall back in his campaign, whenever there was such a to-do amongst the Republicans with regards to Venezuela and Tren de Aragua. And I looked into Tren de Aragua when I first heard about them. I'm very familiar with the city of Denver, lived in Colorado a long time. I have a lot of family in Denver, and none of that rang true. And when I started digging into where the concerns and what the history were with regards to Tren de Aragua, I said, this is fabricated, and that is being perpetuated and not revealed for the fabrication that it is. Says that it is part of a larger scheme and a larger plan. And as we see, again, the United States send these warships down to Venezuela with no real reason for sending them down to Venezuela. I say that if you're going to be drawing troops back from these areas, these broader areas in the world, Europe and Asia, then you failed in your first administration to say, well, let's get them out of Europe and Asia. Well, the Trump is taking a much different tactic and calling them to places much closer to home. So that's how I read the Venezuela situation. And I am concerned that the United States' interest in Venezuela has very much to do with oil. But you can see Trump making calculations and sort of threading the needle between the between the doves and the hawks in Washington, and using the threat of the hawks, like he did with John Bolton in North Korea, to make a move that threatens Venezuela, but then in his way, peeling back from the early demands and coming up with some sort of a forged relationship with them, as when he calls the ships back and he says, "Oh, whoops, there was great change there. They've agreed to do something about the drug and the violence problem in their country. Now we need to focus on the violence and drug problem in our country." And since Venezuela has changed from being our longtime enemy, like Russia and North Korea have changed from being our longtime enemy, all of a sudden we have a new basis for a geopolitical alliance with them in the future.
Going back to the health concerns, I agree on this one. It seems unlikely, but there have been a couple of interesting things that have been said. Vance talking about how he's prepared to take over should something occur. The administration posting old photos. I mean, there's definitely some weird stuff happening, and I don't really know why they would be doing any of those things, or why they'd be having Vance say those things, unless it's just the media plucking out very specific events and calling attention to it. The photo one is the weirdest one. If Trump's been out and about, I don't know why they would post any old photos when they've got current ones. Like, what's the rationale there? I don't really understand. So I think it's unlikely that there would be an announcement of some kind of health concern.
Trump has always been so proud of his health. I don't know that I believe the reports that he gets back from his doctors, but I also think that if he's making big geopolitical moves with other countries, he is not above playing up a charade with regards to his health. I think there's also, and probably what's more so going on here, is that the media does like to pluck out things. If he is threatening the hawks, the neoconservatives, those deep state ties that have such control over, the most venerated media establishments, as we have found out through Mike Benz and through Doge's revelation of the payments coming from the State Department, from the National Institutes of Peace and USAID. They have the journalists and the editors at those media centers have been groomed to prefer the narrative and the concerns of American primacy, American imperial, neoconservative war hawks. And so, if they feel that Trump is threatening their military presence, their coercion of other countries around the world, they begin to understand more fully that Trump is serious when he talks about fair trade versus free trade, that he's serious about respecting the sovereignty of other countries, and he is stabbing them in the front, not so much the back. They could be using the media establishment to turn against him and to set up this narrative of his demise. I also, again, look at AfD and the 6 AfD candidates who have died in the last 2 weeks. We know that that military, that especially secret military organizations, are not above killing, and so they might also be putting that narrative out in the media and praying to God that the next assassin, after the 3 assassination attempts that Trump has already faced, that the next one comes through. I'm not sure. As with regards to JD Vance statements, though, that JD Vance is ready to step in, and I've seen a lot of concern about him, a lot of concern about his relationship to Peter Thiel. JD Vance was selected by Donald Trump because he looked at JD Vance and said, JD Vance will support the fair trade versus free trade policies that I'm trying to turn the United States towards. So, and we also, if we're to expect anything from the vice president, the one thing that they have to repeat over and over is to say, "I'm ready to step in when I am needed." For a vice president to say otherwise is to disqualify. Is the one thing that they can say to disqualify themselves.
It's their only job. It's their only job. I mean, there
Yeah,
is no other job for the vice president other than to just be on standby, waiting in the event that the president is unable to do their job, and then they step in and do the job.
yes, absolutely. And I mean, JD Vance's ties to Palantir, Peter Thiel, and some of those concerns that have been brought forth with regards to Palantir, I think that's another conversation. I don't know that we're going to find any candidate that's not problematic and something that we have to deal with. But this is part of the tension of beginning to realize and grapple with what the United States and what the countries of the world have have created, what the capabilities are with technology, and for us to begin to not tell ourselves some sort of fairy tale narrative about the public sector versus the private sector and when it's okay to spy. Because guess what, um, Google and other countries have been spying on us. The government has had its Patriot program spying on us. For us to all of a sudden pretend that we're worried about it, or we didn't know that was happening in the past, because it's amalgamated into one company, and that company now has access to more of those records and can parse and pick through them. Well, we've been setting this table for quite some time. So I think for us, for Trump to begin turning the world again towards fair trade, towards sovereignty, towards not a universal order of democracies of quote unquote democratic politicians who are selected and groomed, like we've seen in Europe over the last couple of weeks or the last couple of months, like we've seen the United States engaged in selecting since World War II. If we're to allow the expression of power from local groups of people, we need to understand that takes many different forms, and that we don't just get to throw out those regimes as they occur because we don't like the way that they're voting or the way that they set up their government.
I think we should go back to Finland for a second. This is not a country that most Americans really have a good sense of. They're on the border of Russia. They've had kind of this historically frosty relationship with Russia, right? Or at least, that's pedantically, they're up in the cold north, frosty, right?
But I'm ching. I don't know a great deal I don't know a great deal about the relationship between Finland and Russia. I do know that the Rus or the Russians come from Finland. Um, I, what I do know is Finland is a small country, and despite Ted Cruz being oblivious to something like the population of Iran, 90 million people, and being dubious as to Tucker Carlson's questions with regards to the populations of Israel and Iran earlier this year, when I think about conflicts between different countries in the world, especially neighbors, the first thing that I always go to is what's their population, because that'll give you the broadest estimate of what their capabilities are. After population, you say, well, what's the access to resources inside their country? Because if you're going to be making ordnance and you're going to be making war, you need both people, you need technology, you need weapons. When I look at Finland as opposed to Russia, I think that Russia has the upper hand twice. And this is the thing that Europe has been concerned about most broadly, and why they feel so threatened. Partially, I would say mainly because the narrative that there is a European Union, or that there is a military defense arrangement between these countries, is very artificial and has been something that was created by the United States. And so as it's collapsing, we see their anxieties and vulnerabilities about the actual size and the power of their various countries. So when these countries say that they're going to be marshaling, 5% of their GDP, um, uh, what is their GDP, but a measure of how much the international financing sector can be extracting from their citizenry. If they don't have resources, if they don't have a large number of people, they're not going to be really able to fight a war. And whenever you then turn and look inside these countries, and you see that the majority of their citizenry is against going to war, and would rather their politicians be dealing with domestic issues, I think that a lot of this, a lot of the grandstanding that coming from van der Leyen and these various European leaders is exactly that. It's a lot of grandstanding, and it's going to get them voted out of office. And whomever may be killing German politicians is going to find out, just as the Israelis are finding out, that when you kill politicians, you don't defeat political movements, you increase their resolve. And I think we will see an increase in resolve to see change in their governments.
There was some movement as well to make AfD not a politically viable party in Germany. I don't know if you recall this, but I thought I saw something where they were trying to either delegitimize the party or make it outright not a party you could join in Germany, because they were trying to claim some of the Nazi era reconstruction stuff. Do you recall this? Am I recalling this correctly, or am I thinking about something else?
No, you're recalling this correctly. This was going on during back in the summer during the Trump Harris campaign. If you remember, Elon Musk had a space with some of the AfD party to sort of combat it. But this should be no surprise to us with the tactics of sort of the rules-based order, sort of separate elite in Europe. They prefer the tools of lawfare. They prefer judges that they can control, rather than turning to the polls for the vox populi, whatever that may be measured to be. So I don't recall the details of their reasoning behind it or how it fared. I think that the only chance that you have of controlling the voice of the people is through media. I think we've seen that work have more effect in Europe, in the United States, throughout the world in the past, but the ability to control media is collapsing. And as I said earlier, with the State Department and the various entities that are at the fingers of the State Department, and the relationship between the State Department and the Pentagon, as they have had less voice or less ability to drive the way that people think about global issues in the world, as we've seen more people turn to TikTok and to X, to discussions with strangers, to actual recordings of events that are occurring around the world. I think that their response has been to flood these platforms with a lot of different voices. We know that Israel has tried to do so. India has tried to do so by bots and people who are dedicated in establishing narrative and responses. These things are going on in Europe and in the United States too. So this is, as we also see people complain about their X feed, I don't think that it's something that X is actually doing. I think it is having problems with dealing with this sort of new mode of information warfare. So we'll see what happens there. But again, despite all of the attempts to control how people are thinking about these issues, I think that that as people begin to understand what has actually occurred, what reality is, that it increases their resolve.
Well, we'll be watching what the announcement is with the rest of the world. I'm gonna make a prediction here that I think it is something to do with NATO. Like final prediction. You agree with that?
Well, before we make a final prediction, I think that we have to add too that Turkey, Turkey we've long expected, since the coup in Syria that was orchestrated most prominently by actions between an alliance between Turkey and Israel, as Israel has also been drawn further into their conflict, and that weighs weighs in on the Israeli people, and and they, I mean, their conflict is also fought against any number of their neighbors. And by the way, I've mentioned Yemen and Israel's actions against Yemen. I don't know if you caught it, but they assassinated several members of the Houthi government. And you might see online that, oh, this is not the actual Yemeni government, but you have to understand the United States perpetrated a coup in Yemen many years ago because of their support of Palestine, and established a puppet government. But that puppet government doesn't exist very far outside, or maybe even inside the capital of Sana'a in Yemen. So the leaders of the government, of the Houthi government, are actually the de facto leaders of that country. But going back to Turkey, Turkey has also their relationship between Israel is chilling. They have revoked access to their airspace from Israel, and from the get-go of their alliance in overthrowing Syria and taking over Syria, I expected Turkey to have designs on controlling Syria in the wake of that, or the majority of Syria. So that, well, as the saying goes, no honor amongst thieves. That things are going south between that relationship also has portends with what the dynamics of, I don't know, politics and alliances are in NATO. And as we see countries in NATO begin to split further and further with regards to their support for Israel, and their support for Turkey, or what's going on south of Europe, this also I would say give more cause and more concern, more reason for Donald Trump to be saying they got a lot of messes on their hands. It's not just Russia. It's also Israel to the south and Turkey to the south. So it might be a good time for the United States to pack up and leave the Europeans to figure out their issues. So,
so what's the final prediction?
Say what?
So what's the final prediction from your side?
I mean, I lean. I would say that I expect. I guess in short, yes, I expect it to be something about NATO, but I would also expect there to be laying the groundwork for the bringing of troops back into the United States, and some sort of martial law or martial corridor to be constructed along the southern border of the United States. Because if Trump is to bring troops out of the bases that we have around the world, he has failed in the past to do so unless he had a reason to have those troops elsewhere. So, and I think he's been constructing a reason to bring them back into the United States, and that reason has been concerns about immigrant terrorism and drug cartels on our southern border.
And that would have to be in Texas. Like, do you think he's going to try and poke the governor of California yet again?
Well, it doesn't have to be in Texas. So Texas is a republic brought into in the Union in 1845, and because Texas was entered as a republic, it came with sort of the recognized boundaries that were part of Texas. And in the way that this always happens, what did Texas get? It got its debts transferred over to the federal government. So the federal government assumed its debts, and it got the protection of the United States. In 1850, the United States started a war with Spain, and acquired California, New Mexico, Arizona. after that war with Spain, when it established the southern boundary and before it created those states, because they were all territories for some time before they drew up their state constitutions and had the requisite number of Americans in those states to vote and join the Union as a state instead of a territory. Well, the federal government established a corridor along that southern border. And when Trump came into office, he did remilitarize that border. So we could see troops being set up in bases there in Arizona. I do think Greg Abbott would play along with Trump and establish some sort of would maybe seed an identical strip along the Rio Grande, the southern border in Texas, that looks identical to that over in New Mexico, Arizona, and California. But it's already there in Arizona, New Mexico, and California. So I would expect, if nothing else, that the focus to turn there for a while.
All right. Well, I think that's all the time we've got, and we'll see you next time on FOMO.